Welcome back to the fifth lecture of our course of Machine Learning Techniques in Structural Mechanics. And I was not here last lecture, but I think Garrett did a great job combining lecture and practice. And today we'll go back to a little bit more lecture material, and we actually will talk about images and convolutional neural networks. But first, as usual, let me briefly recap what have we learned previously for the last 2 weeks. First of all, we know that we can use loss or cost functions to evaluate how good predictions of our model are. And we basically know that there are different functions for the different types of the tasks that we have, either classification or regression. We played a little bit with the gradient descent, and we understand this is a core algorithm, and it will be core algorithm for convolutional neural networks as well. There is, of course, modifications that we use on practice, and this is quite good. Backpropagation is a cool feature of neural networks that helps us tremendously to effectively update weights for each epoch. And what we also learned, SVMs, implemented that. We know it's important to pick the correct way of measuring the accuracy of model. It's where I actually finished my previous lecture and where Garrett picked it up. We know that there are what are overfitting and underfitting issues, and we probably understand that there is a clear connection between them and bias variance. Is it true? Okay, at least did you try to explain it? Have you heard bias and variance already? If yes, then you definitely know. So now let's go bigger, and now let's work with objects that contain a lot of information. And of course, in this case, when we talk about objects that contain a lot of information, we are talking about images. So if you remember the paper about the pizza quality control, when researchers try to basically match the shape of the pizza and the quality, basically if the pizza passes the quality check or not, what they did, they took an images of the pizza slices. And this is the top row that you see. They did then some transformation, and now they had row number 2. And then there is another transformation, quite interesting one, that leads to this result when we have almost everywhere black except on the borders. So, in your opinion, during these transitions, what happens with the information that we have? So, if we look at the amount of information that we have, what happens during the transition from 1 to 2 to 3? It's simplified, yes, and therefore we're actually losing quite a lot of information. Yes, we're basically losing information. We cannot right now say anything about colors, anything about, again, there is not so much lost information here, but definitely in 1 to 2 transition a lot. And now the question is, why do we need to do that? Why do we do that in general? Why we are not working with the first images, in your opinion? What would be your guess? Yeah, but why do we need to simplify it? Again, more information we have, better our predictions are. Yes, exactly. So in generally, every bit of information matters at the end, but some of them are not so much. So therefore, what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to obtain the most important features and not be overwhelmed with the amount. So we don't care if this pixel here in particular has this, I don't know, black spot. So what we care is the shape. So, and that's the motto of whole machine learning, especially in relation to convolutional neural networks. So, okay, this panel is annoying. So I think I can somehow minimize it. Nice. What to do with the images in general? So here, click here. See the image from our paper, basically the photo of the specimen. And I looked at the details of the image. It's image 950 almost on 1500, and the color is represented as 24 bits. And then if you basically multiply all these numbers, you will get 33 million bits of data, and therefore we will have 4 megabytes file. On the right, you see the image from the paper that we used for our metamaterials. It's basically, the same resolution, the same number of bits, but now when I looked at the details, I saw that it's only 90 kilobytes. And to be honest, I see no difference between left and right pictures. How? Any ideas? How is it possible to have basically the similar image? I see no difference, to be honest, personally, even on this screen, and these two images have so big difference in size, 40 times basically. So what is your suggestion? What's the difference, actual difference between the image on the right and image on the left? No, not you. Any ideas? What have I used in order to get a second image? Come again? Yeah, it's a good idea, but it's not me who found the pattern. It's actually smart algorithms. Actually, it's compression. This is BMP file. It's like the less efficient way to store it, and I will talk about that basically on the next slide. This is a JPEG file, and basically it's compressed file. And when we talk about compression, if you had a course in informatics, I'm pretty sure you should have something like that. So we can distinguish two types of compressions. It's lossless and lossy. So lossless basically doesn't lose any information. It just represents information in a very particular way that helps to save size. It's what happens when you, let's say, archive your files into zip folder, for instance. That's exactly what happens. You can restore them afterwards. But there is another way to do that. It's lossy algorithm, when you kind of really delete part of the data, but you delete unnecessary part of the data. So for us, as a human beings, there is no difference between these pictures. But of course, if you look in the computer, you will see some difference. And that's the beauty of JPEG things, that it utilizes lossy. And basically, if we talk about image representation again, and we will talk about that during this lecture quite a lot. So if we have image, let's say 8 by 8, so it's very easy to, okay, let's do 4 by 4. I don't want to draw a lot of lines. Basically, this is location of the pixel, and in each of this square, you have a number between 0 and 1. Let's say 0 here, 0.5 here, 0.23 here, whatever. Or sometimes you scale it up and use numbers between 0 and 255. That's something more familiar. So when I describe image like that, can I actually represent this particular photo using this grid? Or do I miss one important detail? Any ideas what I'm missing? When I represent my image as basically array, in this case, again, it's 4 by 4, but for this image, it would be, I don't remember, something like that. So it's almost 1 million cells, and in each cell I have number between 0 and 1. So what I'm missing, why I cannot actually use this particular thing to represent this image? When you work with images on computer, so you probably know the answer. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I draw it with red, but it was accidentally. So by using only one a system like that, within, let's say, 4 by 4, 950 by 1500, I can represent only the grayscale images. I cannot represent different colors. And therefore, in our images, what we actually have, probably I can do it very fancy, then we have a green matrix. And we, in this case, have also, it's not blue, this is a blue matrix, and each of them has different numbers. And in total, in order to save everything, we actually need this amount of data, and I multiply by some unknown factor here, because this factor depends on how you save your colors. So if you remember here, we mentioned 24 bits. 24 bits means actually then red, green, and blue goes from 0 to 255, basically 8 bits. And also we have so-called alpha channel, that other 8 bits. So that's how we basically store our images in a very naive way. But as we can see already, it's not efficient. Therefore, I just would like to introduce how CHPEG works, and you will see why I'm doing that, because one of the steps here would be very related to the images that we will use in neural networks. So in general, CHPEG works in the following way. So you first, what's happening inside of the algorithm, you have a color space conversion. So we are using RGB, but it's not the most efficient way to do that. So there is a conversion to another color field, which is called ICBCR, and basically this is one number that represents not luminosity but some specific parameter, and this is how far it's from the blue, and this how far you color from the red. So it's again, there is a direct match between this and RGB. Then what happens is subsamplings. So actually we do downscaling or subsamplings. Then we divide our whole image to 8 by 8 pixel blocks. Do very interesting magical things, and I will show you what is it. It's called forward DCT. Have you heard about the DCT? Have you heard? Yes, discrete cosine transformation. It's something similar if you heard about Fourier transformations. It's sort of in the same family. Then there is a sort of quantization and and then there is entropy encoding. So two of these steps are lossy, so they lose information. So which one do you think? Which of these two steps are actually losing information? Okay, no, that's actually, you're right. Subsampling and quantization, that's two things. And forward DCT, we'll see that. So subsampling, I don't want to stop here for a lot. So basically what happens, depending on the parameters of subsampling, sorry, it's basically on the, you see it on the left, this initial picture, right, it's getting compressed a little bit. So basically what it means, if we say 444, it's actually the initial picture exactly. So let's say if we have say 411, so it means that we actually take the number of colors from the first row, so we cannot use all these different colors. We have to use basically average one, and so every pixel here will be average, and for the second is the same. So there is a different way to average things, but it's important, but it's not quite interesting for us. So, and of course here we are losing data, we are losing some information. And what's much more impressive, it's a forward discrete cosine transformation. And this is a picture I generated. It's a grayscale picture. Basically, I generated in a manner to be somewhere around 0.5 on average. And the value of the pixels goes from 0.25, I think, to 0.75. So random pictures. And now I'm asking, okay, so right now, basically, how much, if I consider that each pixel is 8-bit, so it's from 0 to 255. In your opinion, this is 64 by 60. Oh, it's 8 by 8 image. How many bits of data I have here? 8 by 8, exactly. So it's 250. Yeah, I don't want to calculate some data. So now I would like to, okay, let's lose some data. Let's remove some data. So naive way to do that, okay, let's do the following. Let's just say, okay, I will not count this pixel, I will not count this pixel, I will not count this pixel, and I will not count this pixel. So basically, I will not store anything related to these pixels. So out of, let's say, if I will consider only 1 bit, out of 64, now I have 60 pixels. I save some data, but it looks quite nasty, to be honest, to have these black holes here. And so this is not what we want, especially if you imagine if you remove the half of the pixels, you will basically not be able to restore your picture. And here we have a fantastic tool called forward discrete cosine transformations. Have you heard this picture before? No? Okay. I will not give you a lot of math, but what happens, this transformation does the following. There is 64 patterns that you can see here. So you see how basically they change from this corner there to this corner there. So it's more or less first solid color. Here you have a checkerboard patterns or with high frequency changes, and basically you vary that into direction. So we have basically this is actually the transformation itself. That's how it looks like. So you took the value of the pixel here in x and y coordinates somewhere here, and then you transform it, again, similar to what you are doing actually in Fourier transformations, to another coordinates in UV space. And that represents, this transformation represents, it looks at whole this image and see how much of these patterns are inside of this image. Again, it's hard to explain without proper math, but it basically looks, if, for instance, I would take the same color everywhere, I will have no representations of these high frequency modes. I will have only the left top corner. So what happens in this case? So we have this transformation, again, small one, you don't need to look at that. So, and here I have 64 values in pixels. And what this transformation does, it still returns me 64 numbers. But related to how much of this one, how much of this I have inside of my of my 8x8 block, this one, and so on. So at the end, what I have this matrix. You see, if you compute the number of elements in this matrix, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8x8 matrix. And actually, you see very, very high number here, because this is so-called, you know, you have alternative current and you have direct current, yes? It's called direct. So it's basically direct component. So it's basically average color. And then you start to see the contribution of each particular element inside. And higher the number, the higher the contribution. So now you probably already understand the trick, what will happen next. Instead of abandoning pixels like we did before, we abandon some of these elements here. So that's exactly how algorithm works. And basically, if you play it with Photoshop or whatever and save it with a different compression ratio, with a different quality settings, that's exactly what happens. The 100% quality will not abandon any of these numbers. 50% will basically abandon almost 50% of this number. And that's actually what I did here. Here I removed these 4 elements. Just say, okay, maybe high frequency is not so important. And we see some changes, small changes. I think it's more noticeable here. But in general, the pattern remains the same. More effective way actually to do that is to look at the values at below 10, for instance, and remove them. This one has all elements in this matrix that below to 10, all these things are equal to 0 now. So I do not store the information about them at all. I just abandon them. And I have the image that kind of, again, for you probably with the contrast is not so easy to see, but it's very similar. So, and I save a lot of data. But now, basically what's happening, instead of storing the pixel values, I'm doing some transformation on these blocks. I represented them in a different manner, with a different sort of weights, and get my new way to represent it. So that's basically how it works, and it's important for you from that part to understand that there are multiple ways to store the data, and in this particular way, there is a way to store it in order to focus on the more important parts and abandon the less important parts. And all these lossy conversions work more or less like that. Okay, that's really nice. Let's go back to pizza. Any ideas how mathematically you can do the first transformation? So from this image that you have on the top row to the image that you have on the second row, how mathematically you will approach that? So now basically, we know how image is represented. Now we have in each pixel here, we have 3 numbers. We have basically our cube with a depth of 3, because we have 3 channels. And here we have, let's say, I don't know, 100 by 100, I don't remember. So how would you actually transfer it to this image number 2? Come again? But how? I have three channels. How to do that mathematically? So if I abandon green color, for instance, I will get everything more or less black because there is no green contribution. So what actually happens here is, again, yeah, you calculate some transformations on these 3 channels. So you can do maybe even something so naive as this RGB, and then threshold it. If this value is higher than specific value, that means it's so bright, that means it's a part of the pizza and not part of the background. So I basically do a threshold. For the color. Any ideas what happens then? Because this is much more interesting transformations. So we had some white and black, so ones and zeros. Let's say right now we even abandon intermediate values. How to transform that to these shapes mathematically? Come again? Yeah. You're very close to being right. You're basically right, sort of, if we are not trying to make it official algorithm, but that's absolutely right approach. So the second transition is called edge detection, and you actually describe the logic behind it. Edge detection, and edge detection is an important part of the computer vision. It's one of the most important, to be honest, part, because with edge detection you separate different objects, and like we have a library, not we have, everyone have the library OpenCV that you can use, and there are a lot of very efficient algorithms to do edge detection, and you will see why we're talking about that right now. So again, this is another illustration of why edges are everywhere. So this is an example from the paper when they try to separate and distinguish cell shapes. So this is a cells growing on the petri dish. There is another image with a cell, and of course you see a lot of boundaries. This is an example from machine learning for autonomous driving. So you see on the left image from the camera here, and this is the result of so-called Canny detector. So the basically specific edge detector that transforms the picture to basically these ones and zeros. And if you have a bright spot, you have 1, that means that you're on the edge. So you actually can get even equations of this, like approximate equations of these lines, and it's super important. And even our building, if you look at that, there are so many objects that basically are not in the same, they're in the same field of view, but you definitely can and need to distinguish them if you do some computer vision. So this kind of, we understand this is not a flat because we actually can distinguish this particular tree from the building and so on. So edge detection is important because edges are raising due to shadowing, due to different orientations, and also due to the different depths of the object. So it's extremely important topic. So, and yes, let's simplify. Let's simplify the problem with the pizza and look at this particular picture. We have 0 here. Oh. I have 0 here. I have 1 here, where I smoothen a little bit, so there is some transition, actually very small, but there is still transition, and 0 here. So mathematically, if we look at that in one-dimensional case, what we can easily do, again, this is the same question that I already asked, we can build a function. So basically, either it's 0 or 1. And you see there is a small slope that I did just for convenience, because we never had very perfect edges. Ah, this is an answer. Yes, you already saw that. How to detect edge? It's to take derivative. That's exactly what you described here. So you're actually looking from the left to right and look at the neighbors and just gradually see if at some point there is a jump in the values. So if you take the derivative of this function, you will actually get these 2 peaks. And these 2 peaks, as you can see on the picture, they're exactly corresponds to the edges. And of course, like one of them is positive, another negative. That also helps you to distinguish: are you moving from the black zone to the white zone, or vice versa? So sometimes it's also an important factor. So, and actually, by thresholding the derivative, we might obtain the edges. So just calculating derivative is not enough, especially for the complex images. You need to say, okay, if my value are higher than some threshold or lower than some threshold, I will say, okay, there is an edge. Because of course, in any picture, you always have this transition between different colors, different luminosity, and so on. So that's a way. Now my question is, what to do in 2D? That's exactly where you struggled a little bit in the explanation, if it's circular or not circular. Now this example is 1D. What can we do in 2D? Exactly. I like that you're kind of trained well through the lecture. Of course, you take the gradient. You take a gradient, threshold the gradient, and due to that, you actually will be able to also see the direction. I will show you later how to do that. And this is a very cool thing. So, and here, give me a sec, I want to check actually. I want to keep my attentions. Okay, it's recording. I had some weird feeling that it's not. Return back. So there is one very famous edge detectors by John Caney, and it consists of 5 main steps. So first step, it's smoothing for the noise removal, and we exactly will look at that now. Finding gradients, that's exactly what you hinted before. And there are some thresholding tricks. We will not discuss them at all because they are not relevant for what we are going to do here. And basically how it looks like, you have this image from Wikipedia. Actually from Wikipedia. So you have this iguana, and then you have this borders and edges of the platelets on the iguana. So I would like to look at the smoothing for noise removal, and it will be a little bit more mathematical, but I'm pretty sure will handle that. Well, you're probably from the signal processing and from other fields familiar with the very famous Gaussian distribution. So sometimes you see it in 1D, and in 1D, of course, it looks something like that, but it also can be formulated in 2D, and in this case, it will be defined by this equation, and you have the maximum at the point 0, 0, and it gradually goes to 0 around. So what particular factor, in this case, the question to you, defines how fast the drop is? So which factor in this equation is important? Yeah, standard deviation, yeah, so variance, the sigma, it's important. If sigma is very, very big, you will have very smooth transition. If sigma is very, very small, you basically have almost peak or almost delta function. So why I'm showing that to you? Because there is some cool thing in functional analysis. It's called convolution of functions. So if you work with the numbers, you are familiar with the classical arithmetic operators like addition, multiplication, subtraction, divisions, whatever. You can do the same, for instance, for the matrices. But in matrices, you already have a little bit more things that you can do. Or in vectors. In vectors, for instance, you can do scalar multiplication, vector multiplication, and basically at least 2 multiplications, or actually element-wise multiplication. So there is a operator in functional analysis called convolution, and basically what it does, it takes your function f, takes the function g, and kind of combine them together. How it will look like, basically, if you have the function that maybe looks something like that, as f, so 0, and something like Gaussian in g here. So how it will look like if you take that, for instance, in 0, it's basically will amplify some sort of, right now don't cite me, it's not mathematically correct, but it sort of amplify things around the 0. So what will happen after convolution, your function f will have a larger peak, more or less. So basically you spend more attention on this particular point in f. Again, this is just more or less exponential. However, we also can do, and this is important for images, so-called discrete convolutions. We don't need to look at the continuous functions and integrate. What we can do, we can actually sum elements if we have a discrete points, exactly like we have in images. We can do convolutions on them. Again, right now it may look very scary, but you will see how easy it is. So therefore, yeah. Yes. Yeah, it will be smooth. Yeah. Yes, it will be. Yeah, that's you will see. Yeah, you're right. Actually, okay, it will. No, that's right. In this. Okay, I wanted to show it for the not for the Gaussian in general, but yes, you are right. I correct myself. It will be smoothing, and you will see that actually that's actually what we are going to do in the next slides. So okay, that will be smoothing. So disregard what I say here. It's basically you can treat g as some operation on the function f. It changed a little bit of function f, and that's exactly what we will use for the convolution. You're actually absolutely right that it's smoothing. So that's topic we will. So in this case, let's say we have a discrete grid the same as an image, and let's say we look at the image. I will do 5. Let's say at this pixel, and we want to somehow make a Gaussian convolution in this image. So what in this case we can do, because like the idea of this Gaussian distribution that we focus on some specific location. So after convolution, the contribution, let's say, of this point here will be basically nothing. So imagine that you have these numbers here and you top it with the Gaussian distribution. So in this case, when we look at this big image, so since this measure represents the distance, if we go far, the contribution of this element here will be almost 0, but the contribution on the total in the integral or in the sum that you saw in the previous slide will be the maximum for the points near this point. So if we consider discrete things, what we can say that each cell here has its own weight. So therefore, if we would like to calculate the convolution for this particular cell, we just need to look at the neighbors. And there, of course, we have opportunity to look on the closest neighbors, or we can actually go farther and farther and farther. And therefore, you can actually discretize your Gaussian filter in different ways. So if you take the filter like 3 by 3, then what you need to look at this value. Let's say it's, I would say, okay, I just put random numbers. 5, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 9, 0, let's say, and 3. So now, if I look at that, and I would like to do a convolution at the point number 4, in this point, what will happen? My result at this point would be equal to 4, the values there, multiply by this element in the filter, 4. Then I look at the neighbors. So this neighbor has value of 1, but you need to count it with a weight number of 2. So you just do something like that. Then you look at this neighbor, for instance, and it's 3 and a weight of 1. And so you continue that. We will do that on the next slide until you get the number. When you sum everything, you get some number in this particular cell. That will be the number after convolution. You can also represent it as a 5 by 5. For instance, in this case, you have a different weights in a different elements of your filter, and you have more computations. So, but both of these cases represent this discrete Gaussian transformation, more or less. So exactly that's what I want to show. How does it work? So imagine now that we have something like 5 by 5. Okay, let's do 4 by 4. It will be faster. 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, so bad in drawing. This thing, right? And let me put random numbers. 1, 0, 2, 3, 4, 5. They are not so random, but who cares? And now I would like to actually, so what's happening here, I take this square and put it here. This way, I calculate the convolution for the center of the square. So in this case, my convolution will look like so basically and then I can shift this window. So I don't need to fix only in the number of 5 as a center, but I can shift it on the right a little bit. Do you get it? What's happening? Do you get? So kind of basically, I can take another window and draw it like that, right? So for the green, for the red window, I have a convolution at 5. For the blue window, I have a convolution at, let's say, the center of 6. Can I move it further? No, right now we cannot. Let's say we cannot right now, because if I will move it further, what will happen? I will be beyond our limits. So I have no numbers there. How I can do arithmetical operations on this no number territory. So actually, in this case, by looking at that, how many numbers I will have at the end? So if this is, let's say, matrix B, and I do B convolute with matrix A, and it will be matrix C. So what would be the result? Is it right order? Yes, it will be 2 by 2 matrix, right? It will be 2 by 2 matrix. Is it the same row? Okay. I'm just always confused. Yes, that's right. Where then we will have the matrix 2 by 2. So basically, I don't want to go through this example because we will have a much easier to see convolution on the next slides later. So, but the idea is, for instance, let me calculate this number here. So, what would be the formula for the element? Let's say element x. Someone just give me the computation. So it would be 1/16 because this is before brackets. And then what should be inside? Yes. 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 Okay, so let me finish in this case. And will be equals to something. Do you see that it's like everyone understand what happens here? Again, you don't need to really write whole computations because you will see a better example on the next slides. And so what actually happens here, we calculate the convolution, and if we use this particular filter, let's call it filter, if we use this particular filter that corresponds to Gaussian blur, what we will actually have, we have a blurring of our image. So that's what happens in this case. It's sort of this filter, if you just move it around your image like that and calculate the convolutions, what you will get, for instance, this is a nice example in Wikipedia. This is a way to print things. It's called half-tone printing. It's basically you can use only white and black and change the diameter of the black circles. And then by smoothing, you have a very nice grayscale image without all these artifacts like dots. Right? The same, that's what I did with this picture of this raccoon. So this is original picture. What happens next? I add a little bit of Gaussian blur with a sigma equal to 1, with a deviation, like with this standard deviation equal to 1. And you see a little bit of blurry image there. Then the sigma is equal to 5. You already start to see a lot of blur. And finally, this is like sigma equal 1. This is sigma equal to 5, and this is sigma equal to 10. And you see almost, you still can recognize a raccoon, but right now you have a very smooth boundaries. But that's very good, because if then you will use the edge detection, you don't want to detect edges here, because you will have so many edges, so many very sharp transitions that you will be overwhelmed. What if you will try to do it here, for instance? In this case, I'm pretty sure one of the edges that will be detected is this one, this eye. So it will be detected as one, basically, border between black and white. So that's why we always try to do a little bit of Gaussian blur before doing edge processing. So back to the edge. Now we know about Gaussian kernel. We know that we can take our image, convolute it with some value, with some kernel or filter. There is a multiple terms: kernel, filter, and yeah, it's basically two. There is another term, I don't remember which one. And get a new image, but with a different little bit properties. So let's go back to our edge detection. Let's forget about the Kani filter and about smoothing. Remember how you basically suggested to do a gradient. But if we have a numbers, we have a discrete values, it's really, really hard to take a gradients. So what if we will use kernel like that? Let's try to do that. Let's try to imagine that this image will be represented by the following. I want to start 0, sorry. Let's see that's our representation of the video of this particular image. So basically, I split it into the pixels somehow like that, and assume that there is a 3 rows, right? So do you understand where this come from with tens and zeros? And I say, okay, white will be tens because I don't want to divide it by strange numbers. So that will be our image. It's our image. It's a representation of our image. And now we know our interesting kernel. Let's try to use a kernel. Let's first start basically when it's 3 by 3 kernel. So we cannot move in this case up and down, but we can start in this case with here, right? What would be our resulting? These 3 elements will actually transform to only one element if you look at the vertical direction. So what would be our, let's try to combine the result. If I take this 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 and convolute it with -1, -1, 0, 0, 0, what the sum would be? 0, of course, because again, I will have 0 multiplied by -1. I will have, okay, I think it's better here. I will have a 0 multiplied by -1. I will have this 0 multiplied by 0, 1 multiplied by 0, and continue. So first element would be 0. What's with the second element? So now, basically what we are doing, we're shifting our window one thing to the right. So when multiplied by, again, by -1, 0, 1, -1, 0, 1, -1, 0, 1. So what would be result of the convolution of this filter on the top of these things? 30, exactly. Right? Do you see that why it's 30? Good. Now I will use another color and I will move here. What will I get here? Come again? And then again 30, yes, it basically doesn't change. But now the interesting part actually happens. I will look at this. What would I have? So if I convolute this 10, 10, 10 with this kernel, it will be 0. Again, because we have a -1 multiplied by 10, and on the right side we also will have 1 multiplied by 10. We actually have a 0. So next, if we actually shifted, my colors are running out, but if we then, let's do 2 more, basically we're almost done. So what will happen here? -30, right? Then what will happen? What colors haven't used? here, still minus 30. And finally, let's do it black, 0. So now, if we look at that, we can say the points when we have a value that is not 0, we can say there is an edge. And exactly what happens on this picture. So these 30s, these numbers that are not equal to 0, appear only on the edges. And again, if you remember how this looked like, this is exactly the gradient. So this is a discrete way to basically take a gradient in the x, not gradient in this case, derivative in x direction. Do you understand what happened here and how the filter works? So now that's actually a very powerful tool, and that's quite used quite a lot in computer vision. So you have the filters and you get it. So it's called edge detection kernel. So if you would like to detect edge in this direction, so basically what you see on the picture, you use left kernel. If you would like to actually detect edge by moving from up, like from the top to bottom, you use this one. There is a better filter, it's called Sobel filter. It has similar structure, but it has a different weights, as you can see here. So it's, first of all, minus and pluses are inverted, but it doesn't really make a big difference. It's just absolute value here. But the fact that it has 2 here makes it much better for some more advanced reasons. And actually, with this Sobel filter, for instance, what you can do, you can take your filter, convolute it with a matrix, like basically this one in x direction, in y direction, and then you first can calculate the absolute value, and also you can actually calculate the angle, of course, in this case, because you know the 2 directions. And then if you threshold it, you will get a very nice picture. So this is an image of the black circle on a white background. And this is the representation of the angle of this filter depending on where you're on this circle. So first of all, you see the edge detection. So you definitely see the edge. After this transformation, you have an edge. But here also cool thing that you can see that depending on the color here, you will see that depending on where you are on the circle, you have a different direction of this gradient. So therefore, you know the normal to your edge. So that's really helpful in many applications because you need to know the shape. You don't know only if there is an edge at this point. You really would like to kind of to have more generic picture of what's happening. So that's why these filters are super important. Finally, the question, where are neural networks? We are talking about filters. We are talking about cool convolutions, and they're really nice. Unfortunately, we are not talking about neural networks. The question for you, if you follow me, how do we know corresponding matrices for the filters? How did we get this matrix, or how did we get basically our edge detection filters? What have we done? It's basically quite simple. Previously shown filters obtained either directly from mathematics. So again, we know this Gaussian distribution. When then discretize it, we just run a couple of equations and we know exact numbers. Or actually using common sense. These filters for the edge detection, they are basically just reasonable assumptions that work very, very well. But what if we will try to guess the filters? What if we would like to, if we try just to say, okay, we have no idea what numbers here would be, but what will happen, let's say, if you, instead of 1, you will put a number 3 there, and so on. So what if we will try to guess these filters? And before moving that, I would like to show you very simply why we cannot use the approach that we already used in neural networks. If we have our image, let's say 100 by 100 pixels, multiplied by 3 channels, RGB, how many variables do we have in this case? 3 million, right? Therefore, if we'd like to create our classical neural network, what we need to do, we need to have 3 million points here, then probably something similar, like 3 million points here. And how many weights in this case do we have just to connect these two layers? Quite insane. Basically, wow, a lot. So if 3 million is something like that, if you connect all them, you will have 4.5 multiplied by 10 in. Yeah, that's for 2 layers only. Therefore, we're definitely failing a lot. So we cannot use our classical approach. We cannot say, okay, our image will have this image. And that's why we need to do some neat tricks. Remember these tricks with the cosine transformations. We also, in this case, need to be smart and think how, in this case, to process our images. And in images, one of the cool things that if you have an image, for instance, if you have our dense network, this particular element on the bottom has basically the same influence on this element next to him or to this element in the beginning. So all our input variables have the same weights. They are important, equally important, and we cannot actually separate the importance of this. But if we look at the image, I don't know, we have the cat. I'm not good in drawing. Yeah, that's weird cat. So if we look at the ear, it's probably will not affect if there is a mice here, whatever, how it looks like. So basically this part of the image and this part of the image, they are quite independent. Therefore, what's important, it's the surroundings of our pixels. So therefore, we don't really need to save all of our data like these dense layers. We can do something cooler. And that's exactly what happens in convolutional neural networks. This is a classical scheme, classical architecture of convolutional neural network. So what happens? Initially, we have images, image 280 by 128 by 128 with the 3 channels RGB. Then let's skip this part for now. Let's say that we somehow transform it to this, let's say downsample it to this image. What happens then? We do convolutions. We do convolutions and we get a little bit smaller image, you see 48 by 48, but with a lot more channels. Then we do some small trick, like then we have another layer, and then we flatten that into the dense layer. Finally, at the end, we still need to have the dense layers because we want to do the classification of or regression. So this is how classically it looks like. Let's look at that a little bit in details. So what happens here? We have 3 channel image. And now what we have 2 different, assume that we would like to apply 2 different filters. This is a filter number 1, and this is a filter number 2. Please don't mix up the number of filters that I draw right now and this depth here. This depth, the amount of basically layers of the filter in that direction, should correspond to the amount of channels originally. And you will see what will happen right now. So now what will happen, I will take this, let's say, image with some numbers. Let's say this one. And I convolve that with this one. Convolution in this case means just linear combination. So I will just take the values from here, x's, multiplied by, let's say, some v1, v2, v3, whatever, by the coefficients there. So I will basically have w. It's for the, let's say, red. Okay, then I will do the same for green. And I will do the same for the blue. Oh, this is a green. This is a blue. So, and it will be, if then I have an output, it will be the first element of my output. So this thing goes here. Then I shift my window a little bit to here and do absolutely the same. Take the same filter with some W1, W3, whatever weights and calculate basically number here. And I will continue that. So in this case, according to our rules, if we have 8 by 8 here and 3 by 3 by 3 channels, filters, what would be the dimension here? Yeah, 6 by 6. You see, because we cannot actually move, like basically we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we cannot move further. So we actually will have 6 by 6. And how many channels will I have? How many? 1. If we use only the top filter, actually we get only 1 channel. Now what we are doing, we look at the second filter. Okay, this is actually 1, this is actually 2, and do absolutely the same and stack it behind. So therefore, if we apply 2 filters, like this one and this one, we can actually stack them one by one. And this is exactly what happens here. You see what's happening? You do convolution on the 3, and if you have, in this case, how many filters have we used? 24 filters. We use 24 different filters. Each filter is, I don't know, sum by sum and by 3 in the depth, because we actually need to match the channels. And we basically repeat it over and over again. So that's exactly what happens. So at the end, if we convolute it like that, what we will get 6 by 6 by 2 channels. And that thing we can use as an input for the next convolution. So we'll take another layer and do that. What I'm missing? What am I missing here? Very important thing in neural networks. It's here. It's in this top x, this top expression. Not so. What is missed there? There is 2 things. When we did dense layers, when we did just classical neural networks. Come again? Yes, we're missing, first of all, we're missing bias. That's one thing that's important. It's still actually, it's still there. But also the most important thing is we're actually missing activation function. We still can use ReLU function on the top of this. So actually what happens here, basically first we just do this computation just as linear combination, and then we use some sigma on the top of that. And that already goes to here. Okay, so let me in this case just summarize it. I can write a formula, but they are super convoluted due to amount of dimensions and due to amount of weights. So it's usually better just to try to understand what's happening. So we have our 8 by 8 by 3 channels. And then let's say I use 10 filters. And I would like to filters to be 3 by 3 by, what should I have as a third dimension? Like 3 in this direction, 3 in this direction. What should be here? Because I would like to do this convolution here. I need to match the number of channels initially with the number of channels in filter. So of course I would like to have a 3, and this 3, let me in this case highlight it somehow like that, is from here. So then I do linear combination. Basically for each pixel I do this linear combination. And therefore, so it's something that will look like x, w, whatever. And then plus b. And then I use ReLU function or some activation. And I get, this usually we say as z. We have our sigma z. And this is our output. And this output then goes to the next convolution. Okay? Do you understand the sequence of the actions here? Again, maybe it will be not so necessary for you when you will do programming, but I think it's quite important to understand what's happening in general with this approach. Is it clear more or less? It doesn't look like it's clear, but I hope that it's clear. If not, I will then try to explain better, but you will see it more during the practice. So that's how does it work. So I will skip this one. What's the beautiful thing about that? Okay, let's take a look at the left one. So what's the height of our initial image? 8. What's the width of our initial image? 8. And channel 3. And let's say we have 10 filters. Okay, like that. How many weights, how many numbers are unknown in each of this filter? Like, okay, let's take a look at this filter. How many unknown weights we have here? How many weights, how many elements inside? How many numbers in these matrices? 27. 9 is only in one layer. We actually have 27. So 3 by 3 by 3 plus what I actually missed here is biases. And biases, we have actually 3 biases. We have bias for each channel here. So plus 3 bias. Okay, now the question is, if I will use these layers, these filters, and I use 10 of them, how many unknown variables would I have in total? So this is actually exactly 30. So for 10 filters in this case, how many I will have? So yes, 300. You should understand that in this case, these elements of the filters, they are very similar to the weights that we deal with in classical neural networks. It's basically the same things. And now imagine, my question is, okay, so for 8 by 8 by 3, we have 300 trainable weights. Okay, that's quite good, because in total we have 256 right here. Now I'm asking you, what will happen if I will just say, okay, my image is not 8 by 8. Right now, it's a ridiculously small image. I would like to have image 1 like that, and with 3 channels. So I increase the size of my image by the factor of 10, basically 10,000. How many trainable weights in this case will I have? Come again? Still 300. So now I increase the size of my image basically 10,000 times, but my neural network will not grow at all. It will still have 300 trainable parameters. And that's the exact beauty of that. Because if it will be the dense layers that we used before, we will have exponential growth. We will increase the number of these weights insanely. So that's a beauty. The convolutional neural networks are super cool because the number of parameters doesn't depend on the size of input. Of course, maybe for the large images, you would like to actually play with the number of filters, with the size of the filters, but in general, there is no connection between the number of parameters that you are trying to train for and the input dimensions of your model. And I think we already saw the problem with the convolutions. If we do a convolution 8 by 8, and we have the filter 3 by 3, so what the resulting thing would be? Yes, right. I think it's usually convoluted in this way. Something like 6 by 6. So every step, that means that our size is decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. So there is a trick to avoid that. So it's called padding. And there are 2 options. You can select valid padding. And if you select valid padding, it will be actually decreasing the size. So it's exactly what we are doing right now. But there is another trick called same padding. What actually happens in this case, before the convolution, it actually adds some borders. And in this case, we will have 2 elements everywhere. And usually it's zeros. It may be randomly generated as well. There is some tricks that allows you to to predict some averages there. But in general, that means that you actually pad your size a little bit. So now you have 10 by 10. And from 10 by 10, if you apply 3 by 3, you get 8 by 8. So you return back to your initial shape. Yes, actually, I was wrong. Here, it will have only one element here. So depending on the problem, you can select either valid padding or same padding. If your image is very big, it's like not even very big. If your image big enough, then you don't care about that and you use actually usually valid padding, because if you have image like 300 by 300, just to lose 2 pixels on the left and 2 pixels on the right doesn't make any difference. So, but if your image is small enough, you probably need to care about what you are doing with the padding, because in some cases you can even create the padding that is basically will be circular. So it will, when it will reach this particular element, it will start to look from here. So it's like you are doing computation on like sort of torus or something like that. So, and this is at the bottom, you see the function that creates this particular layer. And as you can see here, this is a convolution 2D. We are doing convolution in 2 dimensions. This is a number of filters too. This is the size of the filters. It's kind of, you can do not square filters, but in generally it's a square. So you say 3, that means a 3 by 3, exactly what we are doing here. Activation, again, as I already mentioned, you need to take into account activation. Therefore, you need to really define it here. And padding. So basically, what you can do. There is another trick that's called stride, and I will not talk about that a lot. But the idea of the stride, is that what we considered right now, we consider these motions. Every time we shift by 1. But what you also can do, you can, let's say, every time shift by 2. Therefore, you actually will decrease your dimensions quite a lot at the end, but in some cases, maybe not so bad, because you actually save computation time when you do the training. So that's another option. Like you have a padding and strides that you can play with if you build your own model. There is another layer, actually, if you look here, we skipped it. It's called max pool layer, and it's trivial one. So what happens with max pool layer? Let's say we have 1, 2, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay, no, I don't know, 5. I would like 4, 0, 0, 2, 1, 1, 3. So hard. 2. So, what do you think max pooling does? Max pool, this layer, it has only one parameter that you can put there, except padding and all the stuff. It's the size. So let's take it max pool with the size 2 by 2. So what does it what it does in this case? It's actually look at the square size 2 by 2 and just pick the maximum value there. Then it shift the windows and put it again. So at the end, if we do max pooling 2 by 2 with a stride 1, so what we'll have, what dimensions do we have at the end? How many elements? So max pooling acts somehow similar to the convolution, but instead of doing these mathematical transformations on these linear combinations, it looks at the 2 by 2 square and just took the maximum. Then it's shifted by 1, took the maximum, and to the 3 by 3, of course, in this case, we'll have. It's quite obvious to see, and it's quite obvious to see that it will be 9, 9, 4. Oh, 9, still 9, 3, 4, 4. And here we have probably something 2, 3, 3. Yes, that would be max pooling. So it's not like, if we do it like that, it's not quite obvious why it's important. But sometimes max pooling you do with a stride of 2. So basically you are shifting window in a way that it's not intersected itself. So what I mean, so if we do stride equal to, therefore we will actually do this window, then we will do this window, then we will do this window, and then this one. So at the end, we'll have only 2 by 2 thing, and it will look like 9, 4, 2, 3. Is it clear what happened basically with that? Why max pooling is important, to be honest, no one really understands. That's really quite a mysterious thing, but you remember when we did the edge detection, what happened? When we see some high numbers, like 30, if you remember, we say, oh, there is an edge. So we do some thresholding still. We say, okay, if everything below let's say 15 will be not considered as edge. Everything above 15 will be considered as an edge. So that's actually a very cool thing with max pooling. So max pooling, just look if there is a feature that you are looking for inside of this, this location on the image. For instance, you are looking for the edge, and you consider the edge, and when the number is more than 5. Therefore, kind of you right now, what you are storing in the initial data, you're storing 16 numbers, and only one of them actually associated with edge. So this 9 here, right? So what's the point of storing so many data if we actually can do this max pooling, still keep the 9, and still say, okay, in this area we have our edge or crack if we are doing some mechanics. So that's a trick. Also, it helps to reduce the amount of data. So basically, max pools are good for feature detection, and this is how you use it in a Keras or TensorFlow. You see, you have a pool size, 2, true, exactly what we did. You can define the stride, you can define the padding. And my question to you would be in this case, how many trainable parameters do we have? We calculated for the filters on the previous slide. For this particular max pool layer, how many? Why you look so confused? No, this is hyperparameters. It's architecture. You're absolutely right to be confused. There is no training parameters for the max pooling. There is no weights for the max pooling. Max pooling is basically free to use because you do not need to count any. You need to calculate the gradient descent. Max pooling is just a trick to reduce the dimensionality. So there is no training things. You are right. There is sizes. There is basically the strides and the padding. But this is so-called hyperparameters that basically define the structure or architecture of neural network. The same as how many filters to choose, how big the filters should be, and so on. So it's hyperparameters, and max pooling doesn't have trainable. Yes. No. Yes. No, there is another pool layer called average pooling that does exactly like that. You just not take the maximum, you just take the average. Also has no training, has no trainable parameters. Yeah, you can use it. Max pooling is more classically applied. No one knows. Okay, just say. More pronounced. Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so that's quite advanced details, but yeah, that's actually quite good contribution. So there is average pooling layers as well. So let's return back. That's right now we can understand everything here, except probably the last step. What happens at the last step? We actually, as I mentioned, still need to have a dense layers. Usually it's not one dense layer, couple of dense layers. But now instead of, let's say, having 10,000 variables there, we have only 261. So we just take this one and do operation called flatten. And that's some operation that is already embedded in TensorFlow. You just basically get the values of the pixels and just stretch them into one array. So there is no fancy things happens. And then again, you treat this as a regular neural network. So just two examples of existing neural networks. One is called LeNet. It's one of the first examples that works quite good. It's 1998. Originally, it was proposed 10 years before that, but it got popular in 1998. And again, that's what you can see here. The initial image that you have here, it's only 28 by 28 in size and has only one channel. That means it's grayscale. So then you have a convolution with 5 by 5 kernel with specific padding, and you apply a sigmoid function. Actually, by looking at that and using sigmoid function, you know that it's quite old neural network because right now everyone is using ReLU more or less. So then you do this pool and average kernel. That's what we discussed. It's not maximum pooling, but average pooling. We also have some different strides. Again, another convolution, another sigmoid, another average pooling, and then we have only 120 input-output values. So we flatten, we have a dense layer, we have another dense layer, we have another dense layer, and we have output one of 10 classes. So we have softmax output. Basically, we need to pick between 10 different classes, right? What do you think the problem for this neural network was? What it tried to do? We have quite small images at the beginning, and we have 10 classes. Does it look familiar? Come again? Yes. If you remember that first slide of our classes, this is what it was for the recognition of the image from the handwriting digits. So it's called MNERST dataset, and LeNet was quite successful on this dataset. So another neural network that's more complex in this case, it's called AlexNet. It was from 2012, and you see it's larger. First of all, it takes much larger images. Then it has again convolution, and you see actually on this example that you start with the quite large convolutions, and then go to smaller and smaller filters. And you see convolution, then you have the pooling, maximal pooling, not average in this case. You have another convolution, you see ReLU functions, repeat it again. There is a couple of convolutions one by one. And at the end, you again flatten your array. You have these dense layers, and you output now one of 1,000 classes. So therefore, this particular model has much more variables in order to be able to fit 1,000 classes. So if here you have, I think, 60,000 trainable variables, trainable parameters, here you have 60 millions. So it's much more. And this particular model was very successful in challenge from the Google, when you need to recognize images and classify them into 1,000 different categories. So like the container ship, mite, motor scooter, leopard, and there are some, I think, unsuccessful attempts to do that. So yeah, because it detects cherry, probably looking at that one, but it wanted to be a Dalmatine. So this is the two examples. Now there are, of course, the systems are much more complicated. One of these very famous models is called Inception, and actually it's called after the movie, surprisingly. So because we need to go deeper, according to authors. So this is the Inception model, the last version, and all these small blocks, orange blocks, are actually convolutions. What do you see any unusual thing in this particular architecture? in comparison with what we discussed previously and with actually previous AlexNets and LeNet? Do we see one thing that is quite unusual? Okay, no, this is a little bit like this is unusual, but it's more or less for debugging, so it's not so important. But channels, why we have this big output here? Okay, usually at the end, what's happening when you progress, and actually on this example as well, even here, the number of channels is increasing and the size is decreasing. So this is a classical way to do that. So there is quite a lot of channels, but it's not a big, the biggest thing here. Here, what you see, what you do, let's take a look at this point. You have one pass with one convolution, one pass with 3 convolutions, with 4 convolutions, with some another processing, and then they merge together. This is actually quite cool idea. That's why this neural network is working well, because it helps to kind of to see which of these passes are more productive for the predictions, more or less. So you do not do it like in linear manner. You in each this loop, you run several models simultaneously, like sub models, let's say, and then you basically combine them together in this red things concatenation. So this is a very cool model. Again, it has 25 millions parameters, if I remember correctly, and you can use it, for instance, in Google Cloud. So I think on that, from the theory, I hope it was more or less clear what's happening with the convolutional neural networks. In general, do you have any questions regarding understanding? Because we have some time to address it. Any questions? Anything? No? Okay, so in this case, let me just summarize what we learned today, and then we will do a 5-minute skip through the paper. So filters are essential elements of the computer vision, as we know right now. For edge detection and blur, the elements of the corresponding filters are usually obtained directly from the mathematics or by using common sense. That's what we exactly did. For convolutional neural networks, filters play a role of trainable weights. So we are not right now looking at the weights, we are looking at the filters themselves. CNN's architecture helps to drastically reduce number of trainable parameters as compared to naive approach. Exactly. Padding and strides are additional hyperparameters that we can use. Again, this is just basically tools. For us, CNNs may include convolution layers as well as pooling layers. For instance, max pool, we already discussed average pooling. And again, finally, there are more advanced CNN architectures with more complicated topologies, and Inception is one of them. There is more and more right now, but we will not even talk about that because, again, there is no point. You either implement them or you just try to mathematically understand what's happening, and we are not going to do that. So on that, I think we are done with the lecture. I will keep the inks, and what I would like to show you in basically in remaining 5 minutes, it's a paper. It's called, yes, I can do that. It's called 3-dimensional convolutional neural networks for heterogeneous material harmonizations. You will be a little bit right now confused because we talked about 2-dimensional CNNs, but nothing helps us to create a 3-dimensional CNNs. Basically, right now we are not looking at the images, we are looking at the volumes. So we have one additional parameters. And what the researchers here did, I upload that with my comments, basically with this one. So the idea is pretty simple. If you have a 3-dimensional parameters, how does it work? Okay, it works like that. 3-dimensional composite materials consisting of the stiff inclusions. These red things are inclusions, and these inclusions are located in sort of epoxy or matrix that is softer. Of course, therefore, by mixing in a different amount of these inclusions and by mixing them in different positions, you will get a different resulting mechanical properties. And calculations in 3D are super computationally expensive because you create the mesh, your degrees of freedom are you have more than million degrees of freedom, and it's really hard task. So their suggestion is, okay, we will struggle a little bit. We'll run 2 1,000 simulations. It will take them a couple of weeks, and then we will train a model that will do everything much faster. So, and the idea basically was simple. They generate the volumes like that you see here. And then what they did, they transformed them to their three-dimensional images. They basically split it into like 100, 100, 100 smaller elements, and then if at least part of the particle intersects this small volume, you will consider that as one. So you basically consider it's a white pixel in your image, and therefore if nothing is intersecting this particular pixel, the pixel will remain black. So what they did this representation. They discussed a little bit about balancing data set. That's important thing, according to Gerrit. And at the end, what you see here, this is a neural network. So they start with this thing. So 100, 100, 100, and 2 channels. I actually don't know what channels provide 2 channels. Then they did filters. You see one additional dimension. Then they do convolution. Then they do ReLU. Then they do max pooling. Then they flatten that. And then they predict the mechanical properties, 12 mechanical properties, 12 elements of the stiffness matrix. So again, here you see exactly what I described you, but in 3D. So for instance, in 3D, max pooling works a little bit different. You look at not at the square, but you're looking at the cube. And you see what's happening. You basically took the largest number of the cube. It's the same ReLU function. So, and you see the filters also right now. They are kind of 4-dimensionals, actually. They just do not draw this channel-like one because they used only one channel. You see here, unfortunately, after conversion to PPTX, the formulas are a little bit weird. This is a normalization. That's important. We did that. So we are following very high standards of doing things. Then they tested a couple of different models, need different architectures, and then calculate the error in the predictions. And they get very nice matching between, this is 12 different mechanical parameters. This is a prediction. This is a ground truth, 45 degrees, very nice. But I would like to show you this one. This is a very cool thing. This is how outputs of the intermediate layers look like. So this is input. That's how, well, it's slice of input, of course, in 3D. When you apply first convolution, what happens? You see, you still see the resemblance of this original inclusions, and you can treat that basically as an edge detection. It's not directly edge detection because you don't know the weights of the filters, but it's something similar. You look at the very small features. In this case, edges will be small features. Then on the next layer, you start to be more abstract. You start to lose the information about each particular particle, and you start to look at the picture in the global. And finally, the last layer, you kind of have almost no resemblance from the initial one. So that's exactly what happens. On the very shallow, on the first basically steps, you are very specific in terms of very small features. And gradually you are doing more and more abstract recognition. And that happens with the face recognition, for instance. When you do face recognition, at the beginning, on the first layers, you really just detect lines. You just detect outline maybe of your eye on the top or something like that. And then if you look at the final, you actually look at the face in general. So you look at the eyes, you're looking at the nose, and on the face as a whole element. So basically they did that. They provide a very nice things. I will skip the sensitivity analysis that they did, but they did one trick thing, and we will actually talk about that in a couple of lectures. What they say, and that's the correct way to do machine learning. When you train something on the specific data, you expect your future data that you will use for basically predictions to be the same as you initially trained it. So you cannot train your model to recognize cars and then feed trains, because it will not be able to do that. But there is a trick called transfer learning. It allows you not to start training from the scratch. And what they did here, I really like that. That's exactly why I'm showing you this particular part. They say, okay, what if our inclusions would not be spherical anymore, but would be elliptical? You can train the same model once again, but what they did a very cool thing. So initial model with this circles were trained on 2,000 elements. When you start to consider ellipses, or ellipsoids in this case, you actually include more and more parameters, because right now you have the orientation and so on. But they say, okay, we will use transfer learning. What they did, they trained only on 300 new data, but they reuse the model for the circles. How they did that? You have the model, and let's say your prediction. What you can do, you can freeze the layers here, add one more layer here, and train only this layer. So this layer will have the same weights as trained for the circles. And then only one layer will be a little bit retrained or fine-tuned to account for the ellipses. And that's exactly what you see here. This is a comparison of the learning curve. This is what they were able to achieve only looking for 300 examples from the ellipses. And it's quite bad in comparison with what you can achieve with the transfer learning. You actually have, because it's logarithmic scale, you have 10 times better prediction just by using this neat trick. So, and we will talk about that in the last lectures probably already, because it's more advanced technique, but I just would like to show you that there is multiple possibilities how to treat neural network. And to be honest, I think on this stage, we are done. And I would like to thank you again for being here in quite hot environment. And thanks. Go ahead. Come again? Yes. It kind of, if you have a more similar you are, the better transfer learning will work. So less training data, new training data you need, less actually training epochs you need. So yeah, therefore, of course, they cheated a little bit. If they will take a squares, they will have quite different results because you have the sharp angles. But the same actually applied right now. What for the image, real image recognition is used exactly that. So yeah, right now you can download the model pre-trained on specific images and then fine-tune it, because you cannot train all these modern models like you were showing inceptions on your computer. Your computer will not be able to, but you can fine-tune that. You can do transfer learning on that, because it will require 1 hour, maybe computational time, and now you have your specific task. Sometimes it's enough to just run 100 new examples. It's like it's called few-shot fine-tuning, something like that. So it's really powerful tool. Yeah, if you do that, yes, you can do it in multiple sort of steps, because if you from the beginning go to square, you will not have enough data. So that thing you can gradually fill it, and yes, there is approaches like that. I never used it by myself, but from the logical point of view, it should work normally. So you just keep similarity, but each step you're still changing things. Yeah, that's possible. Uh, with the polygons, a little bit like from this particular problem, polygons are bad because you have sharp corners, and therefore mechanically you have problems there. So you will have some concentrations of the stresses, and that's something that you do not see in circles. And yes, you still see distribution, but they are not infinite. So that may be not a great idea. That's exactly. But to be honest, the fact that they did it in 3D, yes, it's in 3D. It's quite amazing, because I run simulations in 3D, and one simulation takes 2 hours minimum, because it's like you need to mesh everything. So it's insane. I need to save everything. As I forget to ask. Annotated. We may have just basically some computer vision, but do you want to have a computer vision?